Finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the show, BS Free MD, where we dissect the layers of medicine with a critical eye and bring you conversations that matter. And in each episode, we navigate through the realms of medicine and blending different kinds of science, rigorous science with genuine human experiences. And our discussions range from medical innovations to personal journeys that really reshape our understanding of health and reality. I'm super excited that I'm able to be part of this interview since I'm out of the country. And so we have a three-way conversation going here. We've got a fantastic show for you today. And our guest that's joining us is Dr. Eben Alexander, a respected academic neurosurgeon whose life took an extraordinary turn following a near-death experience. He's a veteran of Harvard Medical School and a New York Times bestselling author. Dr. Alexander brings a unique perspective that bridges the gap between science and spiritual, between science and spirituality. I'm having trouble with my words today. I guess I haven't had enough coffee up here in Canada. So Dr. Alexander's medical career was defined by a strictly materialistic viewpoint and focusing solely on the physical aspects of health. That is until a life-threatening brain infection, meningitis and encephalitis catapulted him into a coma and a journey that challenged everything he knew about the brain and consciousness. So today, he advocates for a model where consciousness is fundamental, influencing how we think about health, healing, and the human experience. And his insights draw on quantum physics and the philosophy of mind, aiming to integrate these with everyday wellness practices. Tim and I are so excited for this as we've been reading this book of his. So welcome, Dr. Alexander.
Well, Tim and May, it's great to be with you today. So glad we get to talk about Proof of Heaven and my experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to just start by, let's have you start with sharing what your life was like before your near-death experience and, how it influenced sort of you and your career in neurosurgery.
Okay. Well, I think it's important to point out, first of all, that a huge ingredient of this whole mix is that I was adopted. I was put up for adoption when I was 11 days old. My birth mother was unwed, 16 years old, but she wasn't really ready to let me go. Social services had taken me, and so she didn't sign the papers to let me go till I was 4 months old. So I was stuck in a baby dorm really for 4 months. That's the kind of setting of the stage. Now, I was adopted into a wonderful, loving family. I mean, I couldn't have been more fortunate. So, I'm certainly not looking for any sympathy at all. But I did have that kind of smoking crater in my life of having been left behind by my mother. And that did have an influence. And there was a kind of a subconscious doubt as to whether or not I was even worthy of love. So it was a kind of a challenge, even though I didn't recognize a lot of that for many, many years. Now, my adoptive father was an academic neurosurgeon. He was the head of a neurosurgical training program. He'd been a combat surgeon in the Second World War in the Pacific Theater for 2 years. In fact, I still have his little pocket Bible, New Testament and Psalms, that he had in his pocket during 2 years in the Pacific Theater. It's at my bedside. And for him, scientist, leader in neurosurgery, there was never any question about his faith in God. He had grown up the son of a general surgeon who took him to church every Sunday in eastern Tennessee in Knoxville. And for my dad, very natural, a infinitely powerful, loving God, power of prayer, science, cosmology, all of it fit together. But like so many of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, I knew that science is the pathway to truth. And like so many of us, especially even in the current era, I made the mistake of thinking that science, of materialism, of the stuff we can measure, that in fact, that was kind of the ultimate descriptor of the world, and therefore it didn't leave any room for spirit, consciousness, beliefs, attitudes, thoughts. Those things were kind of ephemeral and not really part of big, deep reality that science was studying. And the other part of a course that I did not recognize, like so many of us, is that quantum physics is a giant knock on the door, that our little simple assumptions about the nature of reality are false and unfounded. And that's the part that really makes a gigantic difference when you start to put this whole package together. And so anyway, but I was a materialist, kind of towed the line on that belief that the brain creates consciousness, that our existence is birth to death, nothing more. And that's all false, because consciousness is not created by the brain. That was what I was coming to discover, and that's what thousands of scientists around the world have come to discover over the last few decades. And quantum physics was just kind of the toe in the door, telling us, oh no, people, your world is very different from what you think. And leading us really towards that primacy of consciousness. But before my coma, I didn't know or believe any of that. And I tended to kind of dismiss some of my patients' stories, families' stories about their experiences, etc. And I discussed some of those in the book Proof of Heaven, and some of them as wake-up calls to me that I now had a much richer understanding. And really, the whole scientific community is going this way. There's no doubt about it, because this is where the evidence lies. And do remember that for many decades, like in the late 20th century, materialist science would scoff at these kind of claims of a near-death experience or other spiritual experience, and dismiss them as completely ridiculous. Well, when you dismiss deep information, empirical data about the universe, you're only cheating yourself, because you're leading yourself away from the truth. And that's where the scientists today who study consciousness are richly into all of this and studying these kind of phenomena, acknowledging the overlap between many different categories like after-death communications, deathbed visions, near-death experiences, shared death, which are just like near-death but happen in perfectly healthy people. And by studying all of this, and quantum physics, and philosophy of mind, and all the evidence for non-local consciousness, that's what we do in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. That's the third book in this series. I co-wrote that with my partner, who was the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, a form of binaural beat meditation software that's very powerful. I've been using Sacred Acoustics binaural beats, for the last 11 or 12 years daily for deep meditation, to return to my journey and also to help develop relationships with everything that I first discovered in that journey. And I highly recommend meditation to anyone and everyone, because if you buy into your little ego mind, you're in deep trouble. You're not going to figure this out. And that's where the world is waking up to a much richer truth.
So I could get into a tangent here on how just what's happened in my life in the last year, with going through a kind of a personal, I call it midlife crisis, but so many events and things have happened and taken away from me. That was my comfort, and I'm kind of left with nothing, really rediscovering myself. And it just kind of points to what you talk about, how, all the things of the world are really, we search for meaning in them, but it's not really who we are. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't know. You're going to.
One other point is that one of the biggest lessons of my journey is that the hardships, the challenges, illness, injury, these are gifts. It's how we adapt to them. It's how we use our free will to kind of reconnect with the universe and continue with meaning and purpose in our lives in the face of the hardships. They mark a pathway forward that allows for growth. So never fear the hardships and shy away from them, but embrace them as beautiful teachers that help to lead us towards growth of the soul.
Yeah, and I just kind of jokingly, I can say it now, that God had a lot to teach me, because he stripped away every last little thing that I would hang on to. And so it is a period of growth, and I'm figuring that out. What were you going to say, Tim? I was going to say he should get into sharing with everybody what happened. So
the off-ramp from being a strict materialist to to this growth that you've had now for the last 16 years. you had a birthday basically in
Yeah.
November of 2008. So why don't you walk us through what happened there?
Okay. Well, I want to briefly describe the whole journey. I won't go into too much detail because I want to save time for a lot of questions and comments. But I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, November 10th, 2008, with severe back pain. Very soon thereafter, realized I had a horrific headache. And the next thing that happened was grand mal seizures and deep coma. Lying in bed at home, there's a false myth out there created by a writer who was trying to dismiss my stories and dismiss my credibility as best he could. And he kept claiming it was a medically induced coma. But I went into coma at home without any sedation at all. And in fact, I spent the week in coma due to a severe gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis, E. coli, which is almost always a meningitis of newborns. It's very rare to have E. coli meningitis in anybody older than 3 months of age. So my doctors had that deep mystery to kind of face up to. And, my family found me seizing on the bed, called the EMTs. I was hustled off to the hospital. Dr. Laura Potter, my ER physician, didn't even recognize me, even though we'd worked together side by side on many patients before. And she was just told by the nurses, 54-year-old white male in Major Bay 10 who is trying to die. And she went running in there, not knowing my name, didn't recognize me. And after a few minutes of working on me, said, "Oh my God, it's Eben Alexander." But she was the one who did the lumbar puncture. And when I talked with her many months later, she told me once she saw how sick I was, that I'd gone into coma within 3 hours from symptom onset. And then when she did that lumbar puncture and out came thick white pus under pressure, she knew I was in deep, deep trouble. In fact, the doctors estimated I had a 10% chance of survival early in the week, only a 2% chance of survival by the end of the week. And that's why the doctors held a family conference on day 7 of coma. It's a Sunday. And they said, he hasn't responded to 3 powerful intravenous antibiotics. We've had him on the ventilator all week, but it's time to let him go because this is unprecedented in the medical literature to have any kind of meaningful recovery after that severe meningoencephalitis with a gram-negative organism. So it was a few hours later I started coming back to this world. And boy, did I have a story to tell. But when I first came back to this world, important to point out, my brain was still so wrecked by the meningoencephalitis that I didn't even recognize my mother, my sisters, my sons at the bedside. I had no idea who these beings were. What I knew when I woke up was where I had just been on this incredible journey over the last 7 days. And in fact, a huge part of the story, very atypical, is that I had amnesia during the whole week. I had no knowledge of Earth, this universe, Eben Alexander's life events. I had no language, no words. It was an empty slate. And in looking back on it all, in the months and years of trying to figure all this out, it became clear to me why that amnesia was so important. And it allowed for some very, especially deep lessons for someone who wanted to know about consciousness, the brain-mind connection, and all those things I've been so passionately pursuing my whole life. Now, the phases of what I went through in this deep coma really should not have been able to happen, according to the tenets of modern neuroscience, believing that the brain creates consciousness, because of all the documented damage to my neocortex. And all that is evident not just in the book Proof of Heaven, but there's a medical case report on my medical records that came out in Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in September 2018 by Dr. Serbi Khanna, Lauren Moore, and Bruce Grayson. They weren't involved in my care, but they were fascinated by my recovery. And they certainly knew about near-death experiences. And they reviewed my medical records and made it very clear that brain was in no shape to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination. That's a very important fact for people to know, that there's no way this could have been a hallucination because of the damage to my brain. And it was a very deep dive. And in fact, the quality of memories from the deep coma experience, when my brain was so demonstrably offline, those memories are sharp, clear, robust, stable, resilient, as if the thing happened yesterday. Whereas there was a period of 36 hours after my coma, after extubation, where I was in and out of a psychotic nightmare. Those memories faded within weeks totally different between the two sets of memories, and given that those, the memories deep in coma happened when my brain was in absolutely zero shape to have a dream or hallucination or form new memories, says a lot, because somehow all of that was preserved. And then all my memories came back over about 2 months. So all of that was a giant mystery to me. But I'll now take you into the essence of the spiritual journey, just to kind of make that clear. And none of this should have been able to happen according to modern neuroscience. Every bit of my experience, given the background of the medical data, is a complete violation of neuroscientific thought about how the brain and consciousness are related. And that's one of the reasons why so many scientists take my story very seriously.
Yeah,
Now,
if I could, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just really want to put an exclamation point on this, because there is this whole theory of DMT release near death, and it's just a psychedelic experience.
Right.
You know, the spirit molecule. There's a YouTube hour and a half documentary about this, and so this really puts a razor sharp point on this. First of all, you shouldn't have survived. If you survived, you should have been maybe in a vegetative state if you were lucky, but you fully recovered. Secondly, you didn't have a brain to have DMT work on because you were so
Correct.
sick.
Correct.
So-
Very good point.
So
Well,
this
and-
just, wow.
Well, and what I would add to that is in the context of that discussion, DMT, because Sam Harris is one person who kind of accused me. He said, "Oh, obviously Alexander just had a DMT trip. That's all there is to it. Case closed." Well, to answer that question, as part of a scientific research, I ended up participating in a dose escalation study of 5-methoxy-DMT. Got up to 48 milligrams and had an incredibly powerful experience. But it was nothing like the NDE. What I can tell you, and there was a scientific article written about my experience of DMT versus my NDE. And what I can tell you is that the DMT was like looking through a tiny keyhole. And I think you glimpse the same spiritual territory, but you see very, very little compared to what you witnessed during an organic, natural, full bore near-death experience. And so, in fact, I highly recommend to people in prolonged discussions about this topic, you're much better off using a meditation to try and get to these deep spiritual truths. Now, occasionally people do gain benefit from, say, a psilocybin or LSD or DMT experience that helps them in spiritual growth. But I really do not know of anyone who's achieved great success with a lot of use of those substances, other than perhaps Christopher Bache, B-A-C-H-E, who did a very prescribed high-dose LSD, 72-session spiritual journey. And he's written that up, Diamonds from Heaven, other books, etc. But he also admits, Christopher Bache, in his book, A Dark Night, Early Dawn, that binaural beat brainwave entrainment of sacredacoustics.com and that kind of thing is as effective as what he was doing. In his chapter 5 of his book, Dark Night, Early Dawn, he discusses exactly that. And I'm glad psychedelics are now in research for two major reasons. One is that we now know from looking at functional MRI, magnetoencephalography, other ways we have of really looking at brain cell activity on these substances, that what happens to your brain, and most people who've taken LSD or psilocybin, DMT, would think my brain's lighting up like a Christmas tree. No, it's going dark. Your brain takes a vacation when you take those substances. And that's been well documented in multiple scientific papers. I know Christopher Koch of the Paul Allen Research Neuroscience Institute out in Seattle wrote a big essay in Scientific American when this first came out in 2012 and said, surprise of all surprises, your brain on psilocybin goes dark. The default mode network, which is probably the biggest part of our kind of, daydreaming, ego presence mode of thinking, the whole thing disconnects under the influence of these substances. That's one point. The other big point about psychedelics, as Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins showed, is that one dose of psilocybin, not multiple, but one dose in a proper therapeutic setting can have an 80% benefit at 1 year time point in addictions, alcoholism, nicotine, opiates, and also in fear of death in terminal cancer patients. And one dose is all it takes. And I would say that is getting you in touch with your higher soul. That's what that catalytic effect of one dose of that kind of substance is doing. And you can do the same thing, if not better, through a dedicated program of meditation. So that's just my little 2 bits on how to kind of foster these incredible experiences. So now I can shift gears and talk, and again, I'll try and keep it brief, about the experience itself, the most remarkable pieces for people to get. It started in what I call the earthworm eye view, very primitive course on responsive realm, like being in dirty jello. And luckily, I was rescued from that by this slowly spinning white light that came towards me, associated with a perfect musical melody. The notes of the melody were important because they allowed me to later conjure up these light portals that would allow me to traverse these various spiritual realms. Led me up into what I call the Gateway Valley. Now, the Gateway Valley was much more real than this world. We look around at this world and think, this feels pretty sharply real, doesn't it? Well, this is a vague, dreamy experience compared to the near-death experience. And where I was in that Gateway Valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. I never had any body awareness at all. There were thousands of beings dancing down below us. And in my writings weeks later, I called those beings souls between lives. And there was joy and merriment, incredible festivities. I mean, a beautiful, lush, it was like a world of ideals, like Plato's world of ideals, but for the individual soul. And it came in the context of this beautiful kind of earthly scene with a lovely meadow, sparkling waterfalls, and the crystal blue pools surrounded by this big forest and all these dancing beings. Up above those spiritual elements, swooping angelic choirs, emanating chants and anthems, hymns that would thunder through my awareness. Just amazingly kind of blissful. It's kind of what you hear about heaven, that it's just this incredibly joyous, love-based place. And this, of course, the Gateway Valley is where people might have life reviews, things like that, where your life flashes before your eyes. The important thing to point out about life reviews, and I'm taking this information from Bruce Grayson, who has studied NDEs for more than 45 years as a skeptical psychiatrist. And in an article he wrote in the autumn of 2021 in the Journal of Near-Death Studies, he laid out the ingredients of his almost 700 life reviews in several thousand NDE cases he had, and makes a lot of important points. The biggest ones for this moment are, he said, I think it was 74% or so of people felt like they were reliving these events from the perspective of everybody involved. Very important. The golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the fabric of the universe, because in life reviews, if you've been busy handing out pain and suffering to others, been selfish and greedy, you see what it felt like to the other people around you in the life review. And in that setting of beautiful ambient love and connection, that God force of pure unconditional love, any of that kind of greedy, selfish, pain to others stuff we've ever done looks especially horrible. So the life review is a beautiful example that urges us to treat others as we would like to be treated. The other important thing is, I think it was just under half of those patients in those 700 life review cases of Bruce Grayson's, said it was like reliving the events, not just remembering them. So birth, death, everything in between, relived simultaneously. The important point to make about that is these kind of journeys are not some vague little murky, imaginary event. They are stunningly strong examples of our true nature and kind of relationship with the universe. So pay big attention to it. That's kind of the main lesson there. Anyway, in this beautiful Gateway Valley, I remember the angelic choirs provided yet another portal to higher and higher levels of, what I could witness is that four-dimensional space-time world in which we lived. All of that collapsed down. All of this spiritual realm that has a completely different ordering of causality, as I just mentioned. If you can have birth, death, everything in between simultaneously, that's telling you something deep. You're no longer stuck in Earth time at all in that realm. And that shows us a different kind of vector of time that's available to consciousness. So anyway, in this experience, the best part about that Gateway Valley was there was a beautiful guardian angel on the butterfly wing beside me. There were millions of butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations. And this guardian angel, I think, gave me the essential message of the journey. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for.
Oh,
And I'll never forget her face. I'll never forget the way it was a mind meld. She never said a word. She didn't have to. But that's a very common, telepathic experiences are notoriously common in this environment. And so anyway, what then happened was those angelic choirs provided yet another portal. So even the spiritual realm and that kind of deep time or meta time environment, all of that collapsed down until I was out what I call the core. The core was a complete resolution of all dualities. You know, we live in a world of dualities. You have good and evil. You have dark and light. You have masculine, feminine, all the different kind of gradations of things in our lives. But in that core realm, all of it came together into pure oneness. And in fact, I even sensed, and people often think that your religious beliefs will lead to whatever comes out in your NDE. That is not true. Your religious beliefs might influence how you interpret the NDE, but not the content. And, I grew up in a conventional Methodist church in North Carolina. And so what happened next in the core realm, becoming one with God, acknowledging that my very conscious awareness was completely sourced in that God force of pure love, and recognizing all of us are the same. Our very conscious awareness comes from that source. So we're never distant from it. And that's why these experiences can be so powerful, because they take us right into that God level of experience. And we realize how our little ego mind and certain aspects of soul can kind of take us away from that, but that ultimately that's our identity and that we're all interconnected through that. That's another part of the deep lesson of the life reviews. So at any rate, in that environment, I would cycle through these realms. I would spontaneously tumble down from the core realm to the earthworm eye view, but by remembering the musical notes of the melody, I could conjure up the portals, always welcomed by that beautiful guardian angel. You're deeply loved and cherished. You have nothing to fear. Witnessing all this glory and beauty of the intersection point of that Gateway Valley between earthly and heavenly realms. And then, of course, off to the core again through those angelic choirs. Always on entering the core, told, you're not here to stay. We'll teach you many things. You'll be going back. And there came a time when that was true, when I tried using the musical notes in my memories to reinvigorate that light portal, and it didn't work anymore. So this is at the very end of the journey. I remember seeing thousands of beings going off into the distance, heads bowed, holding candles, murmuring energy coming from them. The interesting thing is, even though I was now back in that kind of murky earthworm eye view realm, this murmuring energy and these beings around me was bringing me the same kind of elation and sense of connective love that I'd felt earlier in the Gateway Valley and the core. But now here it was down in the lowest level. And what I call that in my writings was that it was the power of prayer, basically giving me a pathway to come back to this world. And then the final event of the entire 7-day coma was when I saw 6 faces. It would bubble up out of the buck. They'd say a few words, disappear. My amnesia was still very much in force, so I didn't understand the words at the time, but I remember that action, that vision of them appearing in my face, saying these words and disappearing, as brilliantly today as if the whole thing happened yesterday, and yet it was all almost 16 years ago. And those faces were very important. They served as veridical time anchors and basically proved that the vast majority of the coma experience happened between days 1 and 4 or 1 and 5 of my 7-day coma. And I go into all the timing of that in the books, but that's the deep reality, because some people are also postulating that all this kind of memory of this kind of thing only happens when you're coming back and your brain is trying to reorganize and put itself back online. But I know, because of the timing of those 6 faces and everything else that happened, that this all happened much earlier in the 7-day coma than when I was coming out and waking up. And it was the last of those faces that's most important. It was a 10-year-old boy. And of course, I didn't recognize him at the time. And I thought for this whole journey, this can continue, it can cease, doesn't matter, because my amnesia kind of protected me from any sense of connection and responsibility. But now, oh my God, when that 10-year-old boy was there and he was pleading with me, and I didn't understand the words, amnesia, but I sensed the emotional power. And this was Bond. 10-year-old son. He'd been outside the doctor's conference where he just overheard them saying much worse than what he'd been told during the week, which was it was time to let me go. And that's when he came running down the hallway, pulled open my eyelids that were taped shut, and one eye looking over there, one eye over there, neither pupil working. Of course, in medicine, that's a terrible sign. And he was pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. And somehow that got through. But it was the only real moment of kind of terror in this whole thing, because now it did matter. There was another soul out there. I had a responsibility. I had to somehow do whatever he was seeking me to do. And that's what led me back to this world. And as I said, when I woke up on that ICU bed and I was fighting the ventilator, they pulled out the tube and I went, thank you. I don't remember that. I don't remember much of the next 36 hours, but when it finally all stabilized, in fact, my younger sister, Phyllis, tells a funny story that she got there about 20 to 30 minutes after I came out of coma, after they extubated me. And she said I was sitting there on the bed like this little Buddha and looking at each and every person, doctor, nurse, family, friend, what have you. And I would say, don't worry, all is well. And they, there they'd spent this whole week being told I was going to die, this horrible picture. And I'm sitting there reassuring them, don't worry, all is well. And that kind of is my attitude today. All is well.
Wow. I mean, that's so wild. So tell us a little bit about how you discovered who this spirit guide was that was telepathically explaining, things to you and guiding you through this experience. Because that part is a real eye opener.
It's a mind bender, I'll tell you. Because in fact, I'd never paid attention to the near-death literature before. I mean, I thought hallucinations of the dying brain, who cares? But in this particular context, of course, I wanted to read everything I could about near-death experiences as quickly as I could. And my older son, Eben the Fourth, told me, don't do that. Write down, he was studying neuroscience in college at the time, majoring in neuroscience. And he knew that memories are changed every time you revisit them. And so he told me, no. Write everything down you can remember before you read anybody else's NDE. So I did that, wrote 20,000 words over 6 weeks, had my own document of my journey. So it wasn't tainted by anybody else's NDE. And then I started reading, and I was shocked at the similarities in many ways, but also, wow, this guardian angel, I found they were always somebody very important to you in life. And yet I didn't know who this woman was. And I knew her so well because of these deep mind melds we'd had during the week. And yet I'd never met her in my life. And it was almost enough for me to just say, forget about it. It had to be a vast hallucination. It has nothing to do with me. I have no idea where it's coming from. Because if I had scripted it, my father would have been there, my adoptive father. He passed over 4 years before my coma. He was incredibly important in every aspect of my life, my career, everything. And he would have been that guardian angel. He was nowhere to be found in this journey. And so it was almost a deal breaker for me, trying to wrestle with all that and reading all this, trying to figure out the NDE and why this context of this beautiful guardian angel who was very profoundly there every time I passed through the Gateway Valley. And of course, to really tell the whole story, I can't do that because I have to go into way too much detail. It would take a while. But the essence of the answer you're seeking is that it had a lot to do with my adoption story. And that was becoming clear to me because I just met my birth family a year before my coma. And that's a beautiful story that's all retold in Proof of Heaven. And of course, one of the biggest problems had been in my learning of them back in the year 2000 when when Eben the Fourth, my older son, was doing a school project in family genealogy and said that we had to contact the children's home and get more information. All I knew was a teeny bit of data about my birth mother. I had no idea about anybody else. And what we found out in the year 2000 was that my birth parents had gotten married. I cannot tell you what a shock that was. I describe it all in Proof of Heaven. But the social worker who conveyed that information to me in February 2000, she had to fill in some blanks. And she said, well, your parents got married. They had 3 children, but the youngest sister died 2 years ago in 1998. And she said, because of that loss, they're still grieving, and it's not a good time to come back in their lives. She made up a lot of that. She had to fill in the blanks. But I perceive that as another rejection by my birth mother as an adult. And if you read the adoption literature, that is a hell show. You don't want to get involved with another rejection as an adult. It sent me into a dark night of the soul for 8 years, up until my coma. Stopped taking my sons to church, stopped saying prayers with them, just gave up on any belief in a loving person of God or power of prayer. And then a year before my coma, my two of my three sisters said, don't you think it's time you reached out to your birth family again? I went, no, because I remembered how that kicked me off the cliff back in 2000. But they were right. They could tell there was something missing, a hole in me that I was trying to fill in all kinds of ways, but not effectively. And so, yes, it was time to reconnect with my birth family. I reached out again through the children's home, and this time got a positive answer. But the ultimate kind of answer your question is that my birth sister, Kathy, who I met in that exchange beginning a year before my coma, promised to one day send me a picture of Betsy, the sister who had passed. And that picture arrived in the mail 4 months after my coma. And it brought me to my knees when I saw that, and just stunned by this, the tragedy of her loss. But it was really the next morning when I was reading Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying. And she has a story in there of a girl who's in deep coma, is welcomed to heaven by her brother. And then when she comes back to this world, she's talking it over with her father and says, but I don't understand. I don't have a brother. And he said, well, you did, but he died 3 months before you were born, so we never told you about him. And I looked up at that picture on the dresser that had gotten there the afternoon before and went, oh my God. That's when I put it together. I'll tell you, I couldn't stand up. I was just brought to my knees for half an hour or so, just stunned, because all of a sudden the reality of the entire journey started assembling. And it was almost like in this picture that was sent to me, she's looking at me like, do you finally get it? And yes, Betsy, I finally get it.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
This is
I found it fascinating, reading the book, because you hear a lot of stories, but people's experiences are different. How they are greeted by loved ones that they recognize. And you're right, things of their life passed by, but you had like this total amnesia of like knowing anything even about yourself. And you didn't, there was these beings. I mean, did they look like human beings or did they look different? And you didn't connect with
Most of it, I
anybody
would say, most of it, certainly, like all the souls dancing below, it was all human. There were dogs jumping and playing with children, so there was a lot of that. And certainly in the many, many, many stories I've heard in the last 16 years from other experiencers, it should come as no surprise to anybody that our pets, beloved horses, dogs, cats, etc., are certainly part of the spiritual reality. They are spiritually alive as we are. That should come as no surprise to anybody. But there's no real kind of overlap of becoming animal in that setting from my experience. Now I've heard tales of reincarnation in different forms, maybe non-human forms, but by and large, the rule I see applied here so strictly is kind of a knowledge through identification and a resonance principle. So we witness and experience things that are very close to kind of our frequency, and that's the way I would say that my soul encountered the soul of my birth sister. Not knowing anything about her or any of that, to have her as a key figure there was just part of our resonance, our connection, as brother and sister. And that's what allowed us to connect up in that realm, even though I didn't know who she was. And the amnesia, of course, one thing that's very important to stress is near-death experiences are always tailored for the individual having them, period. They're not there for any other purpose. Now, when we study them in mass, we can learn a lot about humanity, the nature of reality, the universe, etc. But they are always there to help an individual soul to grow through and learn certain things it's here to learn and know. And that's why in so many of these cases, people are allowed to come back to this world, because they still have more living to do in this particular body. But another piece of the giant puzzle we put together, and we get into this in deep detail in the book Living in a Mindful Universe, is the reincarnation story. Because the scientific evidence for reincarnation is completely overwhelming. There's no way you can read it and say, it's all made up. This is hallucinatory. You read the work of Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker out of University of Virginia. People go to uvadops.org. Division of Perceptual Studies is the DOPS part. And you'll see they've studied more than 2,700 cases of past life memories in children over the last 6 or 7 decades. 1,700 of those cases are what they call solved. That is, they actually found the person who lived before, who fits all the details that the child reports. And the child might be reporting names, specific names of towns or villages or cities or of relatives and modes of death and all these things. In fact, a third of Ian Stevenson's cases had birthmarks that corresponded with the lethal wound of a prior incarnation. So to claim to have any kind of scientific say on the mind-brain relation, the nature of reality, of consciousness, etc., you've got to be fully aware of the reincarnation literature. The important thing to point out for most people who say, wait a minute, I don't remember past lives, is Jim Tucker and even Stevenson will tell you, you must harvest these memories before age 6 or 7, because natural processes cover them over. So most of us, by our teen years and adult years, we have no memories of past lives or between lives. And yet you can find them through hypnotic regression, through a near-death experience, through meditation. There are many ways to uncover those memories, and they often occur spontaneously in the setting of an NDE. People have these memories of past lives, and even future lives can come to vision. But, the whole past, present, future thing is very kind of interesting.
What about kids that have imaginary friends when they're really young? Is there anything relation? Is that just
I think
your readings? Does that come up as like a past life thing, or is that more just kid imagination?
Well, I think it's really part of childhood that lets us know, yes, they can have imaginary friends. The friends can be very real to them, and we don't know exactly what they're experiencing.
Right.
But when you start reading some of these accounts of children who have strong past life memories, there's one book in particular I can recommend to people. Well, for one thing, read Jim Tucker's book. It's called Before. And then also, that's a great starting point. But one of the cases that he vetted, that's one of the most amazing cases I know of, is in a book called Soul Survivor, Soul Survivor. And it's by Bruce and Andrea Leininger. It's about their son, James Leininger. He was born in April 1998. And when he was like 2.5, 3 years old, he was having all these nightmares of being in a plane that was shot down and crashing in flames. And it turns out the more he disclosed to these memories, he remembered he flew off a boat called the Natoma and all these other things. He remembered all these details. And his parents started doing a little research, and they were very Christian in their beliefs. But what they uncovered was absolutely rock solid, oh my God, evidence of reincarnation, because it turns out that his previous incarnation, he'd been a fighter pilot in World War II, flying in the Battle of Iwo Jima, March 1945, and the Japanese shot his plane down right over Chichijima was the island near in the Iwo Jima chain. But anyway, it's an absolutely mind-bending story. I won't go into detail about it, but for people who want to learn more about reincarnation in past lives, read Soul Survivor, and you will be amazed by the kind of possibilities of reincarnation and these stories as they unfold.
I'm trying to think, and I don't know what you're thinking, Tim, but trying to wrap my head around that, plus the Christian belief, I guess, that I have. Tim maybe could elaborate more, as he grew up in the Christian church. I didn't, but that reincarnation, I mean, that's kind of like messing with the spirit world. Is it really reincarnation, or is it other spirits that you shouldn't, does that make sense? Or
well, an important thing to point out here, Jesus Christ talked about John the Baptist being a reincarnated prophet. So Jesus Christ knew all about reincarnation. He identified somebody who'd been reincarnated. So don't say that Christ is incompatible, or Christianity is incompatible with reincarnation. But when you follow the big story, it turns out that the Council of Nicaea, Constantine, hundreds of years after the time of Christ, they were trying to codify Christianity. And they wanted to have something very powerful. They realized Christianity was powerful. The Roman Empire had tried to crush it, couldn't do it. And so they were trying to now codify and make Christianity part of the Roman Empire. Um, and in all of this kind of information they were putting together, there certainly was talk of reincarnation, but that didn't fit with what they wanted to do to control people. They wanted tithing. They wanted to have the priest in charge of any connection between an individual and, God.
Mhm.
But that's not what Christ was telling us. Christ was telling us the kingdom of God is within. I mean, he was telling us idealism or panentheism is the correct answer. He was absolutely right. The science of today, quantum physics and everything, points to what Christ said, the primacy of mind, the kingdom of God being within, all of that. And reincarnation to Christ was, of course, it happens. Don't even question it. And yet, Constantine felt so strongly that he didn't want reincarnation to be part of it because of the way it disabled this power grab that they were trying to do. He made any talk of reincarnation punishable by inverted crucifixion, which was the cruelest form of punishment that Constantine knew of. That's how much he hated discussion of reincarnation. So he's the one who drove it out of our modern Christianity, not Christ and the original apostles. I mean, they knew, there were stories of reincarnation that they accepted as fact. And of course, given the modern era, the scientific support for reincarnation, we know it's absolutely real. We know our souls come back again and again. But the important thing to get is this is not the kind of reincarnation, say, of Buddhism, where it's this mechanistic wheel of suffering and you want to get off of it. Because in fact, and this is something we discuss in the book Map of Heaven and then Living Mindful Universe, it's a program of grace. It's a program of becoming one with the divine, of learning all those lessons that I was taught in a Christian church, to love each other unconditionally. Love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance. These are the lessons of near-death experiences in the modern era. They're completely consistent with the teachings of Christ and other prophets who talk about love and kindness and compassion, a merciful God. And so all of that fits together very nicely. It's not as if I feel some sense of conflict with my Christian upbringing and what we're talking about now, because Christ was fully on board with this. I would simply tell you that our modern Christianity is not what Christ would be teaching us today. It was a select bunch of pieces that were assembled by church fathers. And in fact, I've learned a lot from reading Elaine Pagel's books, about, say, the apocryphal text. So not just the stuff that was selected for the Bible, but for example, the book of Thomas. You can learn a lot in there. In fact, the book of John is a point-to-point counter argument, a rebuttal against the book of Thomas. And yet the book of Thomas is much more consistent with modern NDEs and all the great kind of teachings of this oneness, this love, this God force, the power of prayer, going within, that's the kingdom of God. Well, that's what our modern understanding of consciousness and the brain-mind connection would tell us. Consciousness is fundamental. That mind of God is the mind we all share. So anyway, there's just a lot to be said about it. But to me, the whole thing starts to ring true. And it's really the saving grace for our world. Because, for example, to have Russia even using, Christianity as an argument that they're going to go out and commit war and murder people? Are you kidding me? Anybody who ever breathes one breath of harming other people in war and violence in the name of that God is completely off the rails. And those religions need to be eliminated from this world. The religions that are consistent with NDEs, with love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, forgiveness, keep going. That's the name of the game. But to me, it's absolute anathema that anybody in the current world would believe for the tiniest second that somebody who's talking about being, Christian or for that matter, Muslim, because Islam is in many ways a very peaceful religion, talking about a merciful Allah and taking care of the unfortunate. That's all it is. We're here to take care of each other. And it's all about love.
Well, I think it's fascinating because when you started talking about going, through the gateway and then to the higher level, what really hit me, actually, that verse that you quoted when Christ says, "The kingdom of God is within you." That's it. That absolutely hit me, and I was thinking that, and I think what happens is, it's different for everybody, but what happens in a lot of these sort of and we like our church, it's organized religion, but in some of the organizing, we actually shrink God down. We shrink
Right.
him down to our sort of material selves and make it kind of this material God, when really, your experience shows us that we need to be thinking of God in way bigger.
Yes.
And that you can literally take those words of Christ as literal. The kingdom of God is inside you because it
Absolutely.
is inside you. The word became flesh because the word was God. God is mind. God is consciousness. God is love. And so when you hear that, you go, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's not like God is a metaphor for love, or Christ is
No,
a metaphor for the
God is
word,
that love.
and Christ is telling us stuff that we need to be nice people. No, he is the word. He is the mind. And it's like, wow, it actually opens up a whole new level of, yeah, this is really something. Like,
Well,
maybe this is
absolutely. You have
actually
hit the
really
nail on
true.
the head. I love that. You're exactly right. And to me, the more, for 16 years now, I've been studying this phenomenon. I've been working with hundreds of scientists around the world interested in consciousness. And you're exactly right. What really nailed it for me, really two quotes from Christ. Now, I don't know where they are in the Bible, but the one is, yes, the kingdom of God lies within you. That was absolutely aligned with the modern scientific position of idealism, or even better, evolutionary panentheism, which is a better philosophical term for what we're talking about here. But that God mind is in all of us, in all of this universe. Um,
So I
and
understand the interconnectedness. I guess I'm still wondering, is God a being that could be visualized or experienced as separate from all of this? Or is it really
To me, there's absolutely
it
no separation. And if you're even trying to postulate separation of your mental experience from that God force, you're interfering with the natural organic system where your very awareness is sourced in that God force of
wow.
pure love. And of course, our little ego mind, way out here on the periphery, a long way from the core realm, our little ego mind can make up all kinds of little tricks around it and be uh, fooled. But that's why meditation is so important, because the primary um, benefit of meditation is putting your ego voice into timeout and starting to follow that kingdom of God that lies within that your higher soul as it connects with God and with other souls. We're all interconnected at
Right.
that level, but the little ego is this tiny little thing that has a role to kind of protect our body and things like that in this world. But in terms of spiritual journeying and understanding the bigger picture, the little ego voice is your enemy. It has nothing to do with the deeper truth. And
I,
that's where acknowledging this kind of bigger sense of self that is not constrained by the ego lets you really get out there. And the other thing I was going to say a minute ago is it's not just the kingdom of God lies within you, but also Christ's statement, these things and greater ye shall do. Because in
Yes.
other words, we try, and Constantine and all those people wanted to put Jesus up on a pedestal, as this son of God, this very special being. Christ is telling us we're all Christ-like. These things and greater ye shall do. That's what he was saying. And the kingdom of God lies within. Those two pieces together, to me, are extremely powerful and reveal
I
what an
yeah.
astonishing prophet Christ was.
I think for myself, and maybe a lot of Christians or people, reading Christianity, get stuck on this vision of the Trinity, where it's God, the Spirit, and then and Jesus, and so the Father, Son, Holy Ghost as
Right.
this power trio that you're right, tap into that with the Holy Spirit infuses in you, but they're still always going to be separate. If that makes sense, like always just in this place above, like
But
that's
see,
still more
I-
powerful, and that is what's fascinating about what you're describing is so different.
yeah, well, I must say that especially after my experience, it made absolutely no sense, this notion of the Trinity. I mean, why would you take something that is so unified and unifying and try and split it up into these different pieces.
Right.
It's the exact opposite of the way you get there through near-death experiences and spiritual experiences and meditation, is you go bathe in that ocean of love and appreciate all the boundaries break down until you're in this ocean of oneness and love and shared meaning, shared purpose, and a shared sense of kind of phenomenal experience. That's
Let's
where
talk.
the modern science of consciousness is taking us. That's what we get. And so to pretend you have to separate, especially a very unifying part of it, like, God has to be split out into Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. I know they were trying to own it in that way. They were trying to be above, say, Islam or Judaism or any of the other faiths, and somehow, trump their statements about reality. But to falsely kind of split God into three parts, to me, makes absolutely zero sense. And that goes along with the empirical observation of many NDEers who come away knowing in this loving personal God. And in fact, I will point out that more than 90% of near-death experiencers over all of history, over thousands of years, across all continents, all belief systems, many of whom were formerly agnostic or atheist, but more than 90% of near-death experiencers come after the experience, not just believing, but knowing the reality of a God force at the core of the universe as a very real and concrete presence. So it's not imaginary, it's not separate, it's not something that you kind of think about and talk about. It's something you experience. And we experience in love and in nature, love for our loved ones, and in appreciating the natural world. All of that is part of becoming one with that God force again. Especially when we're able to suppress the base desires of our ego and be there to help all of our fellow beings and to honor this oneness we share and that we're all in this together. Those are really the gifts that come from this kind of bigger expansion of knowledge about God and the nature of the universe through personal experience. And it's one of the reasons why I highly recommend meditation, because meditation, centering, prayer, for me, they're all the same thing. And it's always a way of honoring the power of that loving personal God that's right there to help bring love and kindness and into this world. And that means taking care of the least, the last, and the lost, the refugees. A lot of things that today are politically kind of unpopular turn out to be the right thing to do.
Can you
And
imagine that?
yeah, imagine that. Hard to believe. But anyway, so that's why I'm pedaling fast as I can. I'm trying to get this out there. And that's why Living in a Mindful Universe is where we really put it together, because Proof of Heaven, when I didn't think of that title, that was from the publisher. And I said, well, that's not a good title because there's no such thing as proof in science. Science is always refining hypothesis and empirical data, but you never conclude anything in science. You simply have a better idea of how the world works. And I said, heaven is such a buzzword, we can't go there. But they talked me into it. A huge committee, publishing. They said they wanted to go with the word heaven and Proof of Heaven. So I went with it. But I will tell you that in the third book, there was a big fight over putting the word heaven in the title. And Karen and I said, the only way you can title this book with heaven in the title is if you say this book is not about heaven, because it's about something much bigger than that little push button notion of heaven, the thing that a lot of materialists will dismiss as non-existent. This is about consciousness and the nature of reality. And that's why Living in a Mindful Universe is the true proof of heaven. It really takes us to the next level as a consolidation of science and spirituality in the modern era. And especially important to note that the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics was for entanglement. Entanglement is a mental phenomenon. It has to do with the connectedness of mind across time and space. And what we see it as is connectedness of subatomic particles. But all it's showing us is that this theater of the material around us is being generated by mind, first and foremost. And that's where the power of free will and mind over matter is so important. And we discuss all of that and the robust implications for humanity in Living in a Mindful Universe.
Wow. So I was just going to say, so does that kind of go down what you were talking about earlier about the quantum physics and trying to wrap our own minds around what time and space is? And even,
Exactly.
do you believe in other universes. I won't say aliens because it just sounds so base, but other.
Well, I mean, I have no doubt about aliens.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they're here to help us. Yeah, and quantum physics is important mainly because all the founding fathers of quantum physics, Werner Heisenberg, Max Planck, Erwin Schrödinger, um, Pascual Jordan, Eugene Wigner, they all made statements of how this thing we call consciousness, our conscious kind of interpretation of the universe, is not the simple little process derivative of material matter, but there are hints within consciousness that it's far grander than that, and it's all interconnected. In fact, as Schrodinger wrote, he could see a multiplicity of many things, but never of mind. For him, there was only one mind. And I know a good friend of ours, Larry Dossey, wrote a book called One Mind back in about 2011. I highly recommend that book. But there are other sources of good scientific sources of this one mind literature. One is our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, but also Steve Taylor's book, Spiritual Science. And I would also say a paper by Bernardo Kastrup in the Journal of Consciousness Studies in 2018. And that paper is entitled The Universe in Consciousness. And those four resources are excellent scientific exposés of the one mind hypothesis, where we say that there's one mind, one consciousness, and our brains serve as transceivers that allow a little eddy current of that one mind to come in. And when that eddy current is there, we think this is our consciousness. It's isolated from the others. But you can show, for example, in identical twins, there's a book called Twin Telepathy. 35% of identical twins have very powerful telepathic experiences. Some so powerful that when one twin touches a hot stove 1,000 miles away, the other twin develops a blister and feels pain on their finger. That's a very strong telepathic connection, mind connection. And of course, in an NDE, your mind, as it's released from the body and the brain, can connect with other minds that are still alive. It connects with minds of those who have left the physical plane. In fact, the most common part of an NDE across all cultures, going back to ancient times, is seeing souls of departed loved ones who come to escort us over. Now, of course, before my coma, I would have said, yeah, that's a wishful thinking, imagination. I now know for a fact it's not. It's the indicator of a true spiritual experience when your loved ones are there to escort you over. That tells you this is really happening. And for example, there's a phenomenon in terminal care and hospice called terminal lucidity or paradoxical lucidity, where someone who with usually a bad brain illness, who might have been in coma for months or years, right before they die, and statistically, it's within hours, days, at most a week. I mean, it's very close to when you're going to die. They wake up. Some of them are more awake than they've ever been in their whole life. They're there interacting with loved ones at the bedside, sharing memories, very communicative, etc. So that's 5 to 10% of Alzheimer's patients. So that kind of thing. So it's showing us the reality of the soul, and that all of our little materialist thoughts about the brain and mind and consciousness pale in insignificance compared to these demonstrations of the primacy of consciousness, the power of soul to shine through at the very end of a physical lifetime to communicate with the loved ones before passing over. I give an example of that in the book Proof of Heaven. Of the friend of mine who happened to be the chairman of one of the top neurosurgical programs on earth, who witnessed that with his own father. And his father had been, unresponsive for a few weeks or months at that time. But right there with my friend at the bedside, his father came back to life, acknowledging the soul of the grandmother of my friend. That would be the mother of this man who was passing, who had died during the Holocaust. And this father had been with her. He was 14 years old when she died. And he never talked about her or the Holocaust, the entire experience, but on his deathbed in these final moments, he clearly was reuniting with her soul, smiling, beaming, ecstatic, and then he passed from this world.
Wow.
So it's a natural part of being welcomed. No one ever dies alone. I can promise you that. Our soul groups come there to rescue and escort us over. And, the more you learn about this, the more reassuring it all is.
Well, this is
I was going to say quickly, there's no talk or mention about like the dark side, a hell, purgatory. I mean, what if your sort of thoughts on that, or from your research and now what you've been studying and learning about that with people's experiences?
Well, I'm very convinced there is no hell. There's no way on earth that loving perfection, God force that so many have encountered in NDEs would allow for a soul to be tormented for all eternity. No, it's just impossible. I would say, though, that there are hellish NDEs. There are about 3 to 5% of them. And I would say that most of those that I've been able to examine, I think are partial. They're incomplete. For example, if I had gone to the earth were my view and that was it, and I came back to this world, I would have had a hellish NDE. But I went a lot deeper and further, went through a lot more, and a lot of oscillation in these different levels. So I had a much grander overall experience.
Yeah,
But
I was reading that part. At first I thought, oh, this is kind of creepy and dark and muddy and murky. And I got
right.
the feeling that it was like a negative, scary experience, that
Well,
part.
that's the important lesson is don't worry. When you know about these stories in big, you've read hundreds or thousands of them, you know that the ambience, the guarantee is of love and of kindness, compassion, of being in your spiritual home, of being very comfortable. Now, if you've been busy handing out a lot of pain and suffering to others, or especially if you really hurt other people, like if you murdered people, or things like that, like, God forbid somebody have to go through Putin's life review, or Hitler's, but they have to go through every bit of the death and mayhem that they caused, feel what it felt like to everybody involved, and then kind of rectify that with their soul journey. That's why life reviews are so important to put us on the right course. But, if you've been handing out a lot of pain and suffering to others, this is why my partner Karen talks about the daily review. Why save it all to the very end? And of course, if you're living this life, if you're meditating every day or using centering prayer, if you're going around the kind acts to strangers, kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance, you're not going to have much damage to go through in your life review. But if you're not, if you're a hardcore materialist who thinks the only thing is how many toys you can accumulate, and the more greed and the more wealth you can accumulate at everybody else's expense means you've been successful, that's not going to be such a great life review, because you're going to be on the other side of all of that. So it's just kind of nudging us gently towards leading that same life that Christ talked about leading. So let's take care of each other.
Which is interesting, because now I start to think about these two diametrically opposed concepts. So there's this, that what you're talking about, where quantum physics is sort of reaffirming the idea of one mind, of the God consciousness, etc. And then you have the AI side. So now you have these people, like Ray Kurzweil, who is a hardcore materialist, wrote the book, The Age of Spiritual Machines. So eventually we're going to have machines that essentially become us. We download our mind. All we are is mind. It's just zeros and ones. And I'm like, that sounds like hell to me.
Yeah, that is not the way all this works. And I mean, AI right now, I've followed this for decades, because in medicine, we used to have what we called expert systems back in the 80s and 90s. And obviously any computer where you get your CPU speed up very high and you get your memory very large starts to get tremendous capability, like playing chess. That's a natural for something like that. But don't think ever for 1 second that machine is aware, self-aware, or conscious, or has a willful influence on its emerging reality and all that. I think that there might be a chance for self-aware machines if we ever can truly develop quantum computing. But there's no way in my mind that a digital computer could ever be conscious. They will continue to grow. I would say from what I see of current AI, for the most part, 90% of it is artificial stupidity. It's nonsense. It's going nowhere. It's stupid. And yet people glom onto it because they think it's cool that a computer can generate a poem or something like that. But true self-aware machines are very far off in the distant future. And we're still learning a tremendous amount about consciousness and the brain as a filter and what that nature of reality truly is. But right now, I'd say a lot of the hoopla around AI is completely misguided and unearned.
Well, and it's unbelievably energy expensive. It
That's true.
uses a I read a stat that to train Chat GTP, so to feed it the data so that it could start to do its thing, use the same amount of electricity as over 100 homes for 125 years.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay. Well, I
That
knew that all the bit mining for Bitcoin was just a horrible waste of energy. For example, just Bitcoin harvesting over the last year has used the same amount of energy as the country of New Zealand. So
yes,
that's watch out for all that. I wasn't aware that Chat GPT and some of these AI systems were that kind of memory energy hog, but it makes sense that they would be.
Amazon is building a server farm next to a nuclear power plant.
Somehow that
Seriously.
doesn't sound like that's what we call artificial stupidity. There's a lot
There
of it
you
out
go.
there.
No, seriously, because they need that much power to run where they see where it's going to go, and
Yeah,
everything's going to be AI. It's like
yeah.
you need like literally gigantic amounts of power. So
Well,
I just
we're
read it in an investing throwaway newsletter, and they're like, yeah, they're
well.
literally
The other thing that the world needs to face is we are truly in the grips of a death possible climate crisis. Burning carbon fuels is a recipe for absolute hell on earth if we keep doing that. If we don't kind of rein things in with our energy appetite and start going with sustainable solar, magma power, hydroelectric, etc., wind power, we really need to move away from burning fossil fuels. And it's going to get so much worse if we don't take drastic steps for that.
well, AI is not going to make that better,
Well, I know.
but it gets a
Again,
pass
let's just
on its
call it
energy.
artificial stupidity and not pursue it.
So
Any before we sort of wrap up, because man, we've been going for a while. But any tips and thoughts, other than straight prayer type meditation, any things that you like to use or recommend for people to really kind of tap into that inner consciousness and quiet the mind? Any
Well,
special
yeah, I
things?
think it's important to point out that the tool that I use, binaural beat brainwave entrainment, and sacredacoustics.com is where you can learn more, is
Okay.
a very, very powerful tool. And what it uses a phenomenon that was discovered in the mid 1800s by a Prussian physicist who found that if you put a pure tone into one ear and a slightly different tone, anything from 0 to 25 hertz different, in the other ear, they will intersect down in the lower brainstem, and they create this very powerful kind of modulating wah 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 sense down in your lower brainstem. And so, if you listen to sacred acoustics, you'll see what I mean. But what's going on there is it's actually causing a very powerful oscillation down in the medulla in the lower brainstem, right left oscillation. Now, remember that, for example, with hypnotic regression, watching a pendulum, you're moving your eyes. That is using a brainstem oscillation of signal to induce a state of conscious separation. Likewise, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, very
mhm.
effective for post-traumatic stress disorder. That is using rapid eye movements, which is engaging the midbrain and this oscillation. And there's something about oscillating the circuits in the lower brainstem that can allow consciousness to be set free. Sacred acoustics, you're just going much lower to a much more primitive part of the brainstem, a part that arose more than 300 million years ago in evolutionary biology. And that is what is giving it the tremendous power. That's why I highly recommend, if you don't have a good tool for getting, escaping your ego mind in meditation, try Sacred Acoustics and pay attention to her website too. It's got a lot of instruction on meditation and how to accomplish whatever goal you have in mind using these kind of technologies. But ultimately, we discover that so much of what we can learn about ourselves and the universe in these deep dives of meditation and centering prayer can be applicable to how we live these lives. So that the real important thing is not so much the meditation as much as taking those lessons from meditation, bringing them into this life so that every choice I make with every breath and every interaction with every human, with every challenge I face in this world, etc., every bit of it is tied to that deep sense of my higher soul identification with the universe and connection with other souls. So acknowledging the oneness, the fact that we're all in this together, we're here to care for each other and show love and compassion. Every bit of that just starts becoming your life moment to moment. And it's really much more important what we do in our waking time than just, it's not like we make all the progress in deep meditation, although the meditation is what gives us that connection with higher soul. So it's really living that life. But to me, it's been incredibly valuable to meditate an hour or two a day. And I know that's a lot of time for most people. Earlier in my career, I'd be lucky to get 15 or 20 minutes to meditate. But knowing what I know now, I would absolutely make that time because it is so beneficial.
Well, we could talk to you for hours, and we really, really appreciate your time. This has been really a mind blower. A lot of stuff to chew on. I know we're going to have people that are like super excited and people that are thinking that we've gone all the way down some new age rabbit hole. And I'm like, you know what? I'm willing to talk to people. And I love this because I think so much of this, I just read another NDE story in one of the paper, the Epic Times or whatever. And I was like, this is exactly what happened to Eben.
Yeah,
I mean,
there are a lot of them out there, and I hear from a lot of people the same thing. They don't share it publicly, but they share back here. That, in fact, is what the book Map of Heaven is all about, is how common these are across the universe. And I'll give you one last resource for anybody who thinks, oh, this is so non-scientific. It is scientific far beyond materialist science. And if you want the source data, you can certainly read Living in a Mindful Universe to learn more. But also, I would recommend the website bigelowinstitute.org. Mm-hmm. And you'll find 29 winning essays for a contest held in 2021. And each contestant had to have at least 5 years rigorous scientific experience investigating the afterlife. They were going to give 3 prizes out. They ended up giving 29 prizes because the essays were so good. They're available for free to the reading public. bigelowinstitute.org. Go there and you'll realize that anybody who ever comes to you in the future and claims to be a scientist who says NDEs are nonsense, they're bunk, they're imagination. What you can realize is Bigelow Institute essays will allow you to say you just are too lazy or unmotivated to read the data. But if you study the information, you will find without a doubt that reincarnation and the afterlife are absolutely real in a scientifically demonstrable fashion. Period.
Wow.
There you have it.
Period. That is the perfect place to end. Thank you again, Dr. Alexander. Anytime you want to come back, we'd love to keep talking to you. All right.
Well, that'd be great. Maybe if we do it again, we could get Karen involved. She has a lot to add to this. She's the co-author of Living in a Mindful Universe. She's the co-founder of sacredacoustics.com, and she has a lot of wisdom about these kind of topics. So maybe
absolutely.
we do
that sounds spectacular to me.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Great talking with you guys, and thank you for getting this out there. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Well, that's it. If you're as fascinated as we are by Dr. Alexander's journey, don't forget to visit EbenAlexander.com, explore his books, and perhaps start your own journey into understanding the vast landscape of consciousness. What a mind-blowing interview. Unbelievable. Did today's episode resonate with you? Why not drop us a like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform? We'd really appreciate it. It really helps us out. Remember, keep it fun, keep it BS free. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. But last and certainly not least, our shout out of the week. Hi, Autumn77 from Instagram. We see you around commenting, liking, and staying in touch. We have no idea how much that means to us. Actually, you have no idea how much that means to us. We really like knowing what you're doing matters. Okay, I'm doing this again. So the first part's fine. I'll do the shout out again. I think it's actually Autumn L77. So you can edit because you're a genius. Hi, Autumn L77 from Instagram. We see you around commenting, liking, and staying in touch. You have no idea how much that means to us. We really enjoy knowing that what we're doing matters and that people like you care. We'll see you around. All right. Till next time.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS3MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS3MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bs3md.com.